Man-sized rats living in the sewers can't be true. Unfortunately for them, it was very much true. Hi, my name's Andy Hall. I'm the writer of this big tome behind us, covering a grand history of Warhammer video games and the artwork. In my day job, I'm the lead writer on Total War and the narrative designer, and I've written and participated in many games, both tabletop and digital versions of Warhammer ever since. And this is a brief history of Warhammer video games, starting all the way back in the 90s to today. So Space Hulk is a classic Warhammer board game, originally kind of designed by a chap called Richard Halliwell, where you are Terminator Space Marines trapped in the confines of a big derelict spaceship. Not just one spaceship, but just an amalgamation of lots of different ships that have kind of gone together like driftwood, and that's kind of known in the lore as a Space Hulk. But often these are also nests for Xenos, specifically like gene stealers. So it was a very kind of tactical, high pressure game. And so that actually translated very well into what was Warhammer's kind of first official licensed computer game with Electronic Arts on the Amiga.
To the Emperor! Ambush!
This was the era where mechanics were often trademarked. Space Hulk had freeze time, which was effectively a simulation of timed turn from the board game. So the action would freeze, you would get to plan out your turn, and then you would press play, and then your Terminators would slowly stomp down the corridors to try and get in position. All the while, the blips of the gene stealers would be moving fast to your positions. And for the time, it was a fantastic game.
Go to the armory and select your weapons wisely.
And one of the things I love about 40k is the spaceships. You know, these spaceships don't look like any other spaceships in any other kind of sci-fi thing. They're flying cathedrals and churches in space, and I think that's a very cool aesthetic, and kind of the later iterations of Space Hulk kind of really played into that. And also, I think even the latest started looking at different ship interiors, probably even stuff that the Warhammer team haven't thought about. It's like, what does an Eldari ship interior look like? What does a Tau interior? So you've got very different looking aesthetics. So these games are kind of isometric battle games. So they really were kind of one of the first kind of digital renditions of Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And so it was kind of the first time you could bring your armies to bear. It was kind of wrapped around you're a mercenary warband kind of story framing. And I think that was to do with, because the technology wasn't quite there to do big armies, but a mercenary warband of probably 5 to 10, 12 units was kind of more manageable. But it also let the developers weave in quite a deep narrative for the time.
Ah, yes. Power. Cleanse. Burn.
Horn Rat obviously featured the Skaven, and then Dark Omen kind of introduced the undead. Remember, there was a great mechanic, is when two units clash, you basically got a fist button above it, and you could press that, effectively kind of add influence to the combat that was going on. So some real kind of micro gameplay. For its time, I think there were great games, and the fact that Dark Omen came so fast proved that they were quite successful. Warhammer had various games in various different scales. One of the scales was called Space Marine or Epic. So it allowed to bring the Titans to the table. So these are a big kind of gothic cities on legs. And Final Liberation, the computer game, was a rendition of those games. So it was very tactically kind of mature, a very kind of strategy heavy game. It was by the guys at SSI, who were kind of famous for those kind of deep thinking, not always very kind of approachable games, but once you got your head in there, they could give you kind of hours of fun. And they're also very famous as well for kind of their live action cutscenes. Those scenes were often portrayed with actors and puppets, a light sprinkling of very basic CGI.
And no longer in charge. Choose your next words with exceptional care.
Epic was all about the scale. Really showed you the stuff that were being described, again, in codexes, White Dwarf articles, and Black Library novels as well. They were, I think, coming into being published around that era as well. So Fire Warrior was probably one of the first of the larger budget games that Warhammer did a deal with. A lot of people always ask, why Fire Warrior? Why the Tau? The reason was, it was to see the Imperium and to face the Imperium. So you got to see like vast regiments, the Imperial Guard, you got to face against Space Marines, and it was to see kind of almost reflect Imperium back on the player to show you what a grim, dark, scary place it was. And the Tau were a very new race, and that kind of fresh face innocence was obviously kind of endearing and something that could be capitalised on for the player to be used as a protagonist. Anything like that brought the narrative of 40k onto the big screen, especially in that era, was ravenously kind of viewed and kind of ingested by the players. Playing the game myself as a consumer of it, it's interesting because obviously the camera, your mind's eye camera of 40k is often up high, looking down at your miniatures on the tabletop. So to kind of bring that camera down into a point of view, you're at that level. So a Space Marine is actually towering above you when you fight them, going through scenery and stuff. Often scenery you recognise from White Dwarf battle reports, because all that kind of stuff was used as reference. Actually, Fire Warrior is one of the few examples where that development then kind of fed back into the source, which is the miniatures of Warhammer. Like one of the Tau sniper rifles was created because there was a need for that in the game, and then obviously Design Studio designed that then fed back into the miniature range at a later date. Dawn of War is an RTS where you take your Space Marines, your Blood Ravens. You were set upon a certain kind of high-level narrative to kind of take over various planets in the name of the Blood Ravens, which kind of a chapter kind of well known for hunting down relics. They've certainly got a thing about librarians in that chapter. And then you would be facing the Orcs. And I think where Dawn of War, what the guys at Relic, great guys, did was kind of the sync and match animations. One entity, maybe your Space Marine, will sync up with enemy entity. Instead of just doing a rote animation loop, the game would know that the Space Marine is fighting an Orc, and so give you a synced animation. Maybe the Space Marine will chop the Orc's head off. They're very expensive to produce because obviously you have different combinations. You want to make sure all these different combinations work and give these bespoke animation cycles. So they're expensive to produce, but the effects are great and players usually love them. Dawn of War 1 was very much a kind of real-time strategy game in a kind of a more traditional sense, with the caveats that games of that era, you would kind of create your base and then you'd probably send some peons off to chop wood. Space Marines aren't going to chop wood. So there was kind of some allowances and some kind of, obviously, some law reasons, make Space Marines seem what they should be, a dynamic first strike force. But it was kind of, you know, a traditional, cool kind of RTS. Dawn of War 2 was actually much more focused and was kind of lauded for this. Kind of a very brave direction, removed the base building aspect, very much kind of focused on the narrative, and a small group of Blood Ravens would then kind of navigate the world maps and the level design to achieve certain narrative goals, face chaos. And then Dawn of War 3 was, I think they were going for more of a kind of almost tournament mindset. I think Dawn of War 3 was like kind of the hero's journey. We'd call it Hero Hammer on the tabletop, when certain heroes or special characters go their power levels where they could wipe out entire units. Why Dawn of War could cope with that fidelity is because they did a lot of concepting. We try to show in the book is that developers, they do an awful lot of art. You know, maybe 50-60% of it never sees the light of day. And so this book kind of brings all that, and we can show that concept art in all its refinery. So yeah, we really do try and bring the artists kind of justice with the book. So Age of Reckoning was done by Mythic Entertainment. Those guys had previously created a successful MMO called The Dark Age of Camelot. I think why those guys won the bid, so to speak, to bring Warhammer Online to life is one of their key features with Dark Age of Camelot was realm versus realm combat. Obviously suited Warhammer, which is very much a game of armies, kind of massed combat. So there was a great balance there. The players could be, a cool hero hammer again. But also the big mechanics for that was this realm versus realm. So you would then fight for your realm, whether you use a dwarf or an elf or even a dark elf. And you could kind of contribute into this kind of big meta-narrative. It was a massive land. It was a massive online land. Hours and hours to explore kind of all the intricacies of Warhammer World. So again, it's kind of what all these games do is bringing those words on the codex page to life, or army book in this instance. I remember like walking through the dwarf halls. This is great. This is like those deep in cutaways, because at that point Black Library were kind of bringing out not just novels but actual kind of background books, which would have like cool cutaways. This is what a dwarf hall looks like, or this is what an elven city looks like. Those were used as source material for the guys at Mythic to create these places. When you're getting into that depth of when does the cart start leading the horse, Games Workshop would provide loads of material, the licensing team, but at some point, some of the developers would need to kind of figure things out. And then obviously they would go back, kind of the Warhammer owners, and go, is this what it looks like? And they would go, maybe, or maybe do this and do that. So Vermintide is a kind of hack and slash, first person hack and slasher, certainly inspired by popular zombie games of the time. And the enemy is the Vermintide, the Skaven. You take a very specific character and then you hack and slash your way through Ubersrick, which was a empire town under siege as the end times of Warhammer started to kind of bubble up. The Skaven, long hidden, the average empire citizen didn't even believe. They were myths. Man-sized rats living in the sewers can't be true. Unfortunately for them, it was very much true. And so they burst out and they were taking over the city of Uberswick. And then you had these kind of 5 heroes who were there. And you, as the player, you take them over, each with their different kind of strengths and abilities and aesthetics, which I know very well because I actually wrote those characters. There they are. And they've kind of taken on a life of their own. I believe, I've never read it, that some people even ship certain characters. Which was never something I would dream of happening, but fantastic that he does. Yeah, it's been a fantastic game. Fat Shark certainly already had in mind what they kind of wanted to represent, and then they kind of let me start thinking about, what these characters should be and look like, and I started to try and twist it. So the next thing they did was kind of switch that dynamic, exciting first-person hack-and-slash gameplay into 40k. They could have taken it to several different places, but they chose kind of a hive under siege, which I thought was very clever. You're not part of some big army or some big organisation. The obvious thing to do would probably have just been, let's do Space Marines. Having them as kind of rejects, kind of conscripted by the Inquisition, a real nice grimdark kind of, we don't care if you fail your mission because we'll just get the next guys to do it, and send them into this kind of half-corrupted hive. I like it. That's just a day in the life of the Imperium. Probably for any other kind of IP, that may be this world-shattering event. For the Imperium, it's Tuesday. Yeah. I was at Games Workshop when the deal was being signed. So then I became previously the gamekeeper, and then I became the poacher. A couple of years being a freelancer, but then I kind of joined Creative Assembly, write and kind of be the lore master for the Total War Warhammer trilogy. So Total War is a very unique kind of strategy game with a turn-based campaign system, a compelling turn-based campaign system, kind of merged with a grand real-time battle simulation. And pretty much since the first Total War game, people were calling for a Warhammer version. So it took a while. The first game was kind of focused on the old world. So you had the dwarfs, the Empire, orcs and goblins. and the undead vampire counts. Could never do the whole thing in one go. It's taken 10 years and we're still about to release a brand new DLC. It was going to be 3 jigsaw pieces that we would bring together, which into what is called the Immortal Empires map. You know, people have spent hundreds of hours, thousands of hours in this world. What we wanted to do was we went west, brought in the elves, both the high elves and the dark elves, and we kind of introduced Lustria. I think what we were trying to do there, because it was still very new, was making sure that we could bring the 2 maps together. So we had that, but also we had to make sure that Warhammer 2 was a product in its own right that players could play and enjoy. So we kind of created what we called the Vortex campaign, which was kind of a narrative-focused campaign. The Vortex that sits at the centre of Ulthuan starts to flounder. That's kind of what's keeping the poles of the Warhammer world in place. You could have this big, perfect sandbox experience with this massive map, biggest map at the time, which every Total War player loves. But we also kind of provided this kind of campaign which felt like, you know, you were playing in a Black Library novel with various protagonists. And then obviously the DLCs carried to build on that, and even bringing in factions at that point that hadn't appeared in army books. So we had the Vampire Coast, which was very successful.
Fortune favors the infamous.
Zombies with flintlocks, vampires that were insane, guest appearances from vampire characters that appeared in other games like Dreadfleet, which was probably quite a niche remembrance now, but was like a Warhammer naval game with all these kind of cool characters and the very specific looking ships. Total War Warhammer 3 was kind of a swan song. What we were going to do was kind of bring in the different flavours of chaos, and we even introduced like the realms of chaos. But what we quickly discovered was that you need good guys. Well, as good as Warhammer guys can be. If you just have a game of chaos demons, it won't be a fulfilling experience. So we kind of pitched that to Games Workshop. We need some guys, and I suggested Cafe, which was almost a footnote, really. They've been mentioned since 2nd edition of Warhammer, and to our surprise, Games Workshop agreed. And not only that, presented us with a more fleshed out Kislev. So we had these 2, all of a sudden, these 2 kind of cool nations that were kind of both placed quite high on the map, who have been kind of the bulwark against chaos. The Empire may arrogantly feel that they've been the bulwark, and certainly the High Elves, but actually if you go towards the east, both Kislev and Grand Cafe have been doing a lot of work stopping chaos just completely covering the globe.
Rogue traders, daring explorers who benefit from a unique style of freedom.
This is a game that is actually a CRPG. The focus of Rogue Trader, unsurprisingly, is on rogue traders, which I think are almost the perfect 40k protagonist, because they get to do a lot of stuff that the average Imperial citizen or even the average Space Marine or Imperial Guard just can't do. They have a warrant of trade, which are very rare kind of legal documentation, often hereditarily gained, and that allows them to kind of void fare across space and outside of the Imperium claimed space and just be dicks. No, they get to go and effectively be privateers, claim planets, rediscover planets of lost human civilizations, and they have a massive amount of leeway. They can, you know, communicate and trade with Xenos pretty much out of bounds for anyone else in the Imperium, maybe the Inquisition aside. Basically, they're allowed to do with what they want, notably assuming it's in the interest of the Imperium, but often with rogue traders, it's in their interest. The guys at Alcat did a really great job bringing these different characters to life. These are more esoteric characters. You're encountering things that you don't encounter in a codex. And so all that needs to be depicted. And so the artists have done this great job showing that more kind of, the more Blanchian, so to speak, because a lot of the time the games have to cleave, totally understandably, to the miniature line. Because this game is so out there, it kind of can explore this utter eccentricity that is so enriching about 40k.
In Sigmar's name, we shall bring order to the savage realm.
So Realms of Ruin is kind of the first big budget Age of Sigmar game. It's actually, if you've never played it and you get the book, you'll get a code to be able to play that game. So Age of Sigmar was kind of what happened after the end times. So we start on the planet of Malice, which is where Warhammer Fantasy was based. You know, many battles were fought, many wars were had, and then the end times happened, and now we have this kind of new era of wars across all these different mortal realms, with some races that are, and armies that are very familiar, some which have kind of evolved over time, like the Stormcast Eternals, forged by Sigmar himself. So Sigmar was kind of the founder of the Empire back in the old times, ascended to godhood, and in the millennia since has become kind of more powerful, and also the bulwark against, you know, the forces of chaos and other kind of forces of destruction. I would say it's very much kind of smaller forces, similar to Dawn of War, a console first kind of strategy game. So Space Marine 2 is actually a sequel to a game called Space Marine, funnily enough, starring Captain Titus of the Ultramarines, and he came to the Forge World of Gaia and fought an orc war boss, but there was, as is often the case with such tales in Warhammer, there was an undertone of chaos and this strange, mysterious power source. Fast forward over 10 years and Space Marine 2 returns, and then he's kind of recalled back to the Ultramarines, goes under the kind of the Rubicon Primaris, be enhanced into a modern Primaris Space Marine, and that's pretty much where the game kicks off. And now we're looking at a kind of proper blockbuster 40k game where you're following Lieutenant Titus, because he's been demoted, because certain people still don't quite trust him, even though he's spent 100 years fighting aliens for the good of the Imperium. And your focus is the Tyranids, using some fantastic swarm tech from the guys at Saber. And it's just a real visceral action adventure that you and two of your mates can play. Again, there's some chaos shenanigans, spoilers. There's some more chaos shenanigans. You know, you look at Space Marine, you think it's a slow, clunking, walking tank. But I think what these games, and certainly the guidance from the Warhammer team, was that Space Marines are these ultimate killing machines. And they're not slow. They're big, but they're like a charging rhino. You know, they can roll, they can push, and when they punch, they hit hard. I think that visceralness certainly comes through in Space Marine, and especially Space Marine 2. There is a warrior athlete under there, and so you've got to make it feel realistic. You've got to make sure it works. So that's a very long-winded way of saying Space Marine 2 is a really cool, very modern, next-gen action-adventure 40k game.
For even more from the grimdark future, why not check out our video on a Warhammer expert answering your questions? Or take a look at Andy's book, The Art of Warhammer Video Games, which is now for sale.